Burn the second barn last, the old man told me, pressing a brass key into my palm at my mother's wake. There's a reason it stays standing. I didn't know him. He was somewhere past 80, thin as a fence rail, wearing a wool coat that had to be too warm for a Tennessee October. He'd come in late after most of the casseroles had been cleared and the folding chairs stacked. He shook my hand like he'd practiced it, looked me dead in the eye, and said that one strange thing. Then he was gone before I could ask his name. My mother was a quiet woman. That's the kindest and truest thing I can say about her. She raised goats on 11 acres outside Sparta, sold soap at the farmer's market, and never once in my 31 years told me a single thing about her life before me. No photographs from her 20s. No mention of my father beyond he wasn't worth the telling. She wore the same 2 flannel shirts in rotation and patched her own jeans. When she died, a stroke, alone in a kitchen found by the propane delivery man who noticed the back door standing open in the cold. She left behind a paid-off house, a herd of goats, and what I assumed was nothing else. I'm an accountant. I work for a regional credit union in Cookeville, reconciling commercial loan portfolios, and I am very good at understanding what a person owns. So when the estate attorney slid the file across his desk and said, "Your mother's affairs are remarkably simple," I believed him. The house. The land. A checking account with $4,000 in it. A handwritten will, witnessed and notarized, leaving everything to me, her only child. Simple. That was the word everyone kept using. My half-brother used it too, though he meant something uglier by it. Wade is 8 years older than me from my mother's first marriage. A marriage she also never discussed. He grew up mostly with his father in Knoxville and drifted in and out of our lives like weather. He called me the morning after she passed, before I'd even chosen a casket. "So it's all yours, I'm guessing," he said. "Wade, she's been gone less than a day." "I'm just asking what the situation is. She always did favor you." There was no grief in it. Just arithmetic. I could hear him doing the math on the other end of the line, dividing 11 acres by 2 and not liking the remainder. I told him there wasn't much. That was true as far as I knew it, but the old man and his brass key sat in my mind like a stone in a shoe. The morning after the wake, I drove out to the property as the fog was still burning off the ridge. My mother kept 2 barns. The first was the working barn, goats, hay, the milking stanchions, the smell of warm animals and grain. The second barn stood at the far edge of the field, weathered silver, doors chained shut for as long as I could remember. As a kid, I'd asked her once what was in it. She said, "Things that aren't mine to throw away," and that was the end of it. I never asked again. Children learn quickly which doors stay closed. The brass key didn't fit the chain on that barn. It fit a strong box I found inside the first barn, tucked up in the rafters above the feed bins where I'd never had reason to look. I needed a ladder and 20 minutes of swearing to get it down. Inside was a phone number on an index card, a name, just a last name, Vandermeer, and a single line in my mother's handwriting, "Call only when I'm gone. They'll know." My mother did not have associates. My mother had goats and a soap recipe and a deep suspicion of anyone who used the word networking. But the handwriting was hers, the careful slanted print she used on the soap labels, and the index card was real, and the old man at the wake had been real. And I am a person who follows where the numbers lead. I called the number that afternoon, standing in the cold barn with the goats complaining behind me. A woman answered on the second ring. Older, crisp. The kind of voice that has spent decades being precise on the telephone. I gave my mother's name. There was a silence. And then a soft intake of breath that I have replayed 100 times since, because it was the first sign that my mother had been someone other than who I knew. "We were very sorry to hear," she said. "We had hoped she would call us herself near the end. She always said she'd want to handle it in person." "Handle what?" I asked. "That's not something I can discuss over the phone. Would you be able to come to the office? You'll want to bring identification and a copy of the death certificate. We're in Asheville. Asheville is a 2-hour drive over the mountains. My mother, to my knowledge, had never left the county except for an annual trip she called going to see about the bees, which I'd always assumed meant exactly that, a beekeeping supplier, somewhere. I'd never questioned it. You don't question your mother's small mysteries until they crack open and turn out to hold something enormous. I told the woman I'd come at the end of the week. Then I sat down on an overturned bucket and let the goats nose at my coat, and I tried to feel something other than the strange, cold certainty that I had not known my mother at all. I didn't tell Wade. I told him I was driving to Asheville to look at a beekeeping operation she'd had a stake in, which I framed as a hassle, a loose end, something not worth his time. He bought it because it was small, and Wade only ever paid attention to things that smelled large. Whatever's in it, we split, he said anyway, reflexively, the way some people say bless you. The drive over the Smokies was beautiful in a way I couldn't take in. I kept thinking about the second barn. Burn it last. There's a reason it stays standing. I'd gone and looked at it again before I left, walked the perimeter, found the chain rusted solid and the padlock seized. Whatever was in there, my mother had wanted it sealed, and a stranger had wanted me to leave it for the end. The office in Asheville was not what I expected, which is to say, it was not anything. A small suite on the 3rd floor of a renovated brick building downtown, a frosted glass door, a name etched in it that meant nothing to me. Inside, the woman from the phone turned out to be in her 70s, sharp-eyed, dressed like a retired schoolteacher who'd done very well for herself. She shook my hand and held it a half-second longer than a stranger would. "You have her chin," she said. "I should have guessed before you said the name." She brought me into a conference room and set a folder on the table. Inside were documents going back 19 years. My mother's signature on every one. That same careful slant. And a number that I read 4 times before it stopped sliding off my brain. "Your mother established a fund with us in 2006, the woman said. She made deposits twice a year, every year, without fail. The last one was this past spring. I'm an accountant. I know what consistent contributions over 19 years can become, even when each one is modest. I just couldn't make it square with a woman who patched her own jeans." "This can't be from soap," I said. The woman smiled, not unkindly. "It isn't from soap, although she did mention the soap. She was proud of it." She paused. "Your mother received a settlement many years ago from the company. She never touched it for herself. Not a dollar. She lived on the goats and the soap and what little the land made and everything else she put here, and she directed it outward." "Directed it where?" The woman opened the second folder. I want to be careful here because the rest of that afternoon rearranged my entire understanding of the woman who raised me, and I don't want to flatten it into a list, but the shape of it was this. In 1989, before I was born, my mother had worked at a chemical plant in East Tennessee. She'd been young. There had been an exposure. A tank, a valve, a foreman who told everyone it was nothing. Several of the workers got sick over the following decade. Some of them died. My mother had been part of a small group that pushed, quietly and for years, for the company to acknowledge what had happened. The settlement, when it finally came, was divided among the survivors and the families of the dead. My mother's share was substantial, and she had spent the rest of her life giving it away to the others. To the widow of a man who'd worked beside her. To the daughter of a coworker who needed treatment the insurance wouldn't cover. To a fund that paid for headstones of all things because she'd noticed that some of the families couldn't afford to mark the graves, and she'd decided that men who'd been told their suffering was nothing would at least have their names cut into stone. She didn't want it known, the woman said. She said the moment people know you're giving, they stop hearing you and start counting. So she kept the soap stand. She kept the goats. She kept the small life. Because the small life let her do the large thing without anyone looking too closely. I sat there. Outside the window, Asheville went about its afternoon. I thought about every patched pair of jeans. Every time I'd been faintly embarrassed by her in high school, by the goat smell on her coat at parent-teacher conferences, by the way she'd buy day-old bread. I thought she was poor. She had let me think she was poor. It was, I understood now, the most expensive thing she ever did, letting her own daughter believe her small so the work could stay quiet. "There's a letter," the woman said. "She left it with us, years ago, to be given to whoever came. She suspected it would be you." The envelope was soft from handling, as though my mother had taken it out and held it and put it back more than once over the years. The handwriting on the front said only, "To whoever loved me enough to come." I didn't open it there. I couldn't. I put it in my bag and I drove home over the mountains in the dark, and I didn't cry until I was past the state line. And then I had to pull over because I couldn't see. I opened the letter that night at her kitchen table, the same table where she'd done her ledgers by hand and labeled her soap. Her voice came off the page so completely that I had to stop twice. She wrote that she hadn't kept it from me out of distrust. She wrote that money does something to the way people listen. That the day she'd come into the settlement, men she'd considered friends had started looking at her differently, had started suggesting how she might share. And that she learned then that the only way to give cleanly was to give invisibly. She wrote that she was sorry I'd grown up thinking we had less than we did, and that she hoped, when I understood, I'd forgive her for the lie that the patched jeans had been. And then she wrote about the second barn. "Burn the rest if you want. The papers, the records, all of it can go. But the second barn isn't mine and it isn't yours. It belongs to the families. Every box in there is someone's father, someone's husband, the things the company tried to bury, photographs, the internal memos a man named Ostrander smuggled out before he died, the proof. I kept it because someday someone might need it, and I didn't trust it anywhere but here, where a stranger would only see a locked barn full of junk. Don't burn it. Burn it last, and only if there's no one left who needs the truth." I read that part 3 times. The old man at the wake. "Burn the second barn last. There's a reason it stays standing." He had known. He'd been one of them, one of the survivors or the son of one. And he'd come to a wake in a too warm coat to make sure the daughter understood before someone else got to the chain with a pair of bolt cutters. Wade got to the lawyer before he got to me. A week after Asheville, I received a letter, a real one, on letterhead, from an attorney in Knoxville informing me that my brother was contesting the will and demanding a full accounting of all assets, foreign and domestic, disclosed and undisclosed. Somehow he'd caught the scent. I found out later he'd called the same number I had. My mother's index card had a copy in a drawer in the house, and Wade had let himself in one afternoon while I was at work and gone through her things the way he'd always gone through everything, looking for the part that was supposed to be his. He called me that evening, and there was heat in his voice now, the cold arithmetic gone. 11 acres and a checking account, huh, he said. "You looked me in the eye and said there wasn't much." "I didn't know yet, Wade. I found out the same week you did. There's money in Asheville. A lot of it. Don't insult me. It isn't money," I said. "It's a fund. It goes to people. Sick people, dead men's families. It's millions," he said, and the word cracked in his mouth. "It's millions, and you're going to hand it to strangers while your own brother is 2 payments from losing his house." I closed my eyes. I knew about the house. I'd known for a while. Wade had always lived on the next thing, the next business, the next loan, the next sure bet, and the next thing had always fallen through. My mother had helped him more than once, quietly, the way she helped everyone. He never knew that the help came from the same well as the stranger's help. He thought he'd been getting scraps. He didn't know he'd been a beneficiary of the same hand that paid for those headstones. "She helped you," I said. "More than you know." "Don't," he said. "Don't you dare tell me she helped me. She left me out of the will entirely. Read it back to yourself." He was right that he wasn't in the will. He was wrong about what it meant. I hired a lawyer of my own, an old man in Cookville named Del Faircloth, a Korea-era veteran with a voice like gravel rolling downhill and a habit of letting silence do half his arguing. He read the trust documents the Asheville office sent over, and he set them down and looked at me over his glasses. Your mother, he said, was the most careful person I have ever read on paper. This will hold. The fund predates the will by 17 years. It's irrevocable. It isn't part of the estate. Your brother could sue every week for a decade and he'd own a stack of his own legal bills and nothing else. He took his glasses off. But I'll tell you what I tell everybody. Families don't break over money. Money's just the crowbar. The crack was already there. The crack had been there a long time. I knew that. Wade and I had grown up on opposite sides of a mother neither of us fully had. Me with her goats and her silences. Wade with the suspicion, planted by his own father, that she'd chosen me and discarded him. He'd carried that for 40 years. The money just gave it a place to go. The contest played out over 4 months, and Faircloth was right. It was procedure, not drama. No courtroom shouting. A judge in a beige room asking quiet questions while a clerk typed. Wade's lawyer argued that my mother had concealed assets, that the fund should have been disclosed, that I had exercised undue influence. Faircloth answered each point in his slow gravel voice with a document attached. And the documents always said the same thing. She set this up before her daughter was old enough to influence anyone. She set it up to be untouchable. She knew exactly what she was doing. On the third hearing, the old man from the wake came. I hadn't asked him to. I didn't even know his name until Faircloth called him to the stand and he said it. Theodore Ostrander, the son of the man who'd smuggled out the memos, the boy who'd grown up because my mother's fund had kept his family in their house after his father coughed himself to death at 44. He was steady on the stand. That too-warm coat traded for a clean shirt. And when Wade's lawyer tried to suggest that my mother had been manipulated by the people she was helping, the old man looked at him for a long moment. Son, he said, nobody manipulated that woman. I tried for 15 years to get her to take so much as a thank you, and she wouldn't have it. She gave us back our father's names. You don't manipulate someone like that. You just try to deserve them. The room went still. The judge dismissed the contest the following week. No gavel, no speech. A letter in the mail. Petition denied, that was all. Wade didn't speak to me outside the courthouse on the last day. He stood by his truck, the one he'd refinanced twice, and looked at the pavement, and when I came up beside him he said, "She really never told me about any of it." "She didn't tell me either," I said. "I found out the day you did." "But she trusted you with it. She trusted you with it. She trusted me to protect it. That's not the same as choosing me, Wade." I don't know where the words came from. They felt true the second they left me. "She didn't give it to me to keep. She gave it to me to hold." He looked at me then, and for the first time in my adult life, I saw the boy in him, the one who'd grown up 2 hours away from a mother who'd handed her whole self to strangers and never explained why. The anger was still there. But under it, finally, I saw the grief. I went home and I sat with what Faircloth had said. The crack was already there. And I sat with what my mother had written. Money does something to the way people listen. And somewhere in the middle of those two things, I made a decision she hadn't asked me to make, but that I think she'd have understood. The fund couldn't be dissolved, and I wouldn't have dissolved it if I could. But the trust documents allowed the trustee, me, now, discretion to extend hardship assistance to family members of the original group under structure and oversight. My mother had built that door. She'd built it narrow, on purpose, with conditions, counseling, accountability, no lump sums, no blank checks. She'd built it, I came to believe, for exactly this. For a son she couldn't reach. For the day someone she loved would need help in the one form that wouldn't poison him. I drove to Knoxville on a Sunday. Wade's house was the kind of nice that's 3 months from being repossessed. Good neighborhood. Dead grass, a porch light burned out. He opened the door and didn't say anything. Just stepped back to let me in. "I'm not here to gloat," I said. "Then what?" I told him. The fund couldn't be split and I wasn't going to lie to him about that. That part was final and he needed to hear me say it plainly. But there was a provision for family, structured, A financial counselor paid for by the trust. A schedule. Help tied to honesty, not a check tied to a closed door. He was quiet for a long time. "You want to put me on an allowance?" he said finally. "I want to keep you from losing the house. And I want it to be the kind of help that doesn't turn into the next thing you lose. I'm not a charity case." "No," I said. "You're my brother. The charity cases are in Asheville. You're the one I actually have to look at on holidays." That got something out of him. Not a laugh, but the ghost of one. He sat down at his own kitchen table where the bills were stacked, and after a while he said, "She paid off a loan for me once. Years back. Told me a buddy of hers had a fund for veterans' kids and I qualified." He shook his head slowly. "There wasn't anybody, was there? It was her. The whole time." "The whole time," I said. He put his face in his hands. He didn't cry, or if he did, he didn't let me see it. When he looked up, his eyes were red and his voice was rough. "I sued her grave," he said. "I sued a dead woman who'd been paying my bills in secret for 20 years. You didn't know. That's the part that's going to sit on me," he said. "Not the losing. The not knowing." We sat at that table until the light went out of the windows. We went through the numbers, what he owed, what it would take. Not to fix it in a month, but to hold it steady over 5 years. Spreadsheets. The least dramatic thing in the world. I'm an accountant. I was, finally, exactly the right kind of useless and useful. A year later, the two of us stood in the field outside Sparta in front of the second barn. I'd had the chain cut by then, but not to burn anything. I'd had the boxes professionally archived. The photographs, the memos, the proof a dying man had smuggled out in a lunch pail in 1991. There was a lawyer in Nashville, a young one with fire in her, who'd been looking for exactly that kind of documentation for a case on behalf of 3 families the original settlement had missed. Burn it last, and only if there's no one left who needs the truth. There was still someone who needed the truth. So the barn stayed standing, and the boxes went to do the work my mother had been saving them for. 20 years after she'd locked the door, Wade had changed in the way people do when the change is real, which is to say not at all on the outside and entirely underneath. He'd kept the house. He met with the counselor every month and sent me the statements without my asking because he'd decided he wanted to be a man who sent the statements. We still argued. We were still ourselves, but the thing that used to sit in the center of every conversation, the cold arithmetic, was gone. "She could have just told us," he said, looking at the barn. "All those years, she could have said one true thing." "She told us the truest thing she had," I said. "She just told it in goats and soap and a locked door. We weren't reading it right. The fund still runs. Headstones still get paid for, quietly, for men whose suffering was once called nothing." 2 of the original families finally got their day in a Nashville courtroom because of what was in a silver barn on 11 acres. My mother's name appears nowhere in any of it. That's how she wanted it. The moment people know you're giving, they stop hearing you and start counting. I think about that more than anything else she left me. Not the number in Asheville. The way she lived so small on purpose, so that something large could go unwatched. I used to want a different mother. One with stories, with photographs, with a normal coat. I understand her now in a way I never could have if she'd simply handed me the truth. If you've ever buried someone and found yourself standing in a quiet house wondering who they really were, I hope you'll go looking. Open the locked door. Climb up into the rafters. The people who lived the smallest lives are sometimes the ones holding up the most, and they almost never tell you because telling you was never the point. The point was the headstones. The point was the houses kept. The point was a daughter who'd grow up thinking her mother was poor and learn, too late to say thank you, that she'd been the richest person in the county all along, and had spent every dollar of it on strangers' names cut into stone. For a long time after the barn was emptied, I kept going back to one question my mother never answered out loud: why she let me believe we were poor. I think I finally understand it. She wasn't hiding the money. She was protecting the work from the thing money does to people. The day she came into that settlement, she watched friends start measuring her, and she made a choice to live small so the giving could stay invisible. Every patched pair of jeans was a decision. Every day-old loaf of bread was her keeping a promise to men whose suffering had been called nothing. That's not poverty. That's the most disciplined kind of love I've ever seen, and it took me until she was gone to read it correctly. What strikes me now is how much of this came down to character, built quietly over decades. My mother never lectured anyone. She didn't post about the headstones she paid for, or the houses she kept standing. She simply decided every single morning for 19 years to do the right thing where no one could see her do it. That kind of steadiness isn't a feeling you wait for. It's a habit you choose again and again until it becomes who you are. I used to think strength meant the loud version, the medals, the stories, the recognition. She showed me it's the opposite. The strongest thing she ever did was refuse to be seen. And I think about Wade too, because his story is the other half of the lesson. He spent 40 years certain he'd been cheated, and the certainty cost him everything: his savings, his judgment, nearly his house. He wasn't a bad man. He was a man who let resentment do his thinking for him. What turned him around wasn't the money he didn't get. It was the moment he finally understood the truth and had the honesty to sit with how much it hurt. Real change asks for that. You have to be willing to look clearly at what you got wrong, and then keep showing up to fix it long after the feeling fades. If there's anything I'd want you to carry out of my mother's life, it's this. Decide who you're going to be when no one is keeping score, because that's the only place character is actually made. Learn to read the people you love, really read them. Past the goats and the silence and the locked doors, before it's too late to thank them. And when life hands you something heavy to hold, don't look for the easy way to set it down. Hold it steady. My mother lived small on purpose so something large could go unwatched, and I'd give anything for one more Sunday at that kitchen table to tell her I finally see it.